Well, hello. I'm going to be doing one of my longer form videos now. This one's going to be on the Franciscan note. I talked about the 3 notes of Franciscanism. The first video I did was on the note of humility. This one is going to be on my favorite, I think, the note of joy, and my next one will be on the note of love. These 3 notes really get at the heart of what the Franciscan spiritual path and way of following Christ actually entail. And the reason I think this is perhaps is my favorite of all the notes is because I think it's what is the most distinctive of all the Franciscan characteristics. This real commitment to a joyful living and expression of one's faith in Christ and a living out of Christ in their lives. And I think it's interesting. It's an interesting one because certainly Francis's take on what perfect joy looks like isn't going to resemble what a lot of people feel that pure joy should look like. And I will explain that a little bit in a moment. But I think it's that, both humility and love are aspects of, key aspects of other spiritual paths and communities. You find it within the Benedictines and the Jesuits and all those. It's central to Christian living. But I say that joy is central to Christian living as well. But it is certainly a key characteristic of what the Franciscan way is meant to embody, this joyful expression, even in some of the most harshest circumstances, the ability to remain having a joyful heart even when there's adversity around you and you're suffering in the world. Joy is this distinctive characteristic of Franciscan life and a way of following the gospel, the way of Christ that Christ shows us. I think it ought to be at the heart of all Christian life as well, because I think life in the way that Christ gives us, in the way that Jesus shows us, is a life that brings joy. Francis's understanding of joy is not what many people in our modern society, or even in his society of his day, would consider joy. And he had this wonderful conversation with his fellow Franciscan brother Leo. Leo did a lot of note taking and recording of Francis's of what Francis said and did, and evidently on one occasion he and Francis were walking back from Perugia all the way to Assisi, to their little shack called the Porzelunchia, which is in Assisi. And it was during winter and it was cold and snowy and wet. And because of obviously their state of extreme poverty, they really did suffer from the cold. And they had this conversation about what perfect joy looked like. I will put a link into the full story because I'm not going to be able to explain it all here. It goes on too long. But in essence, for Francis, the core to perfect joy is the gift from God to participate fully in the life of Christ. And that includes Christ's willingness to suffer for the love of other people. So the story goes that, Francis starts to talk about what joy is or isn't. And joy for Francis isn't that we would have all the spiritual gifts and all the spiritual highs that would be able to heal the sick, cast out evil spirits, or even bring people back from the dead, or speak all the languages, or have all the knowledge that the universe has to give us, or even to be able to preach and have everyone that you preach to converted to the way that Jesus shows us. None of that is perfect joy for Francis. Perfect joy is literally the honor that God feels that we are worthy enough to enter into the suffering of this world for the sake of love of other people. That's my take on it anyway. So when you have that understanding of what perfect joy looks like, when you're going about the loving work that Jesus and God the Father gives us to do in this world, and you encounter suffering of any kind, whether it's your own physical suffering, for the context of the story that Francis and Brother Leo they were in the bitter cold. They obviously were experiencing physical suffering. And then the story goes that when they, Francis says, for example, if we get to the Port Salunkia and the gatekeeper refuses to let us in, first of all thinks we're imposters, that we're not who we say we are, or even worse, knows who we are and then drives us away and beats us so that we are left cold and wet and hungry and beaten in the snow. That is what perfect joy is, because we've been considered worthy to just glimpse and taste a little bit of the suffering that Jesus went through for the love of the world. I know that sounds in modern ears quite sadomasochistic, but in essence for us today, and for me as a Franciscan, being able to see and to remain joyful, especially in those really tough times, maybe where, like I am at the moment, in pain with this leg, or as I experienced the night before last, a cold, hard wooden bench as the place for me to sleep. They're very minor things compared to what other people are suffering in this world. But the pure joy is the privilege, really, the honor of being considered not worthy so much, but being considered able by God the Father to enter into that suffering, into the suffering of this world, for the sake of love of other people. One of the reasons I'm doing this walk is to partner with Amos Trust, who are working in Gaza and the West Bank in Palestine. And there's no one at the moment on this planet who are suffering like the people of Gaza, both with the bombings and the sheer cruelty of what's going on, and the starvation that is completely human-made. They are literally living in hell. And for a Franciscan, the perfect joy is to be considered able to bear the weight, some of the weight of that suffering, and to stand in solidarity and love for the people who are suffering the worst in this world. It's not just the Palestinians around this world. There's no shortage of places to look where we might be called to enter into with the deepest of compassion and solidarity into the suffering of others. And I suppose there's another tractor, I'm sorry. It is rural France. I suppose the being able to maintain one's joy in that circumstance is is what Franciscan spirituality and what makes it really distinctive, I think. We don't seek it out. In nowhere in Francis's conversation with Brother Leo about perfect joy does he ever suggest that we ought to seek out that suffering, but we ought to recognize that if it happened to the one whom we claim to follow, then we ought to expect it at some points in our life as well. You know, for me, along this journey, there have been times of being uncomfortable and uneasy. You know, times of not having a bed for the night, and the pain of my leg, but that pales in comparison with the suffering of this world. But it's perhaps a gateway for me to be able to develop the empathy, the understanding, the compassion, and the solidarity of being willing to enter into the suffering of others. And in the midst of that, find the perfect joy that only comes through faith, and it only comes through knowing that in doing so, that's what love looks like. Love looks like a willingness to be there in the worst of times, not just in the best of times. I know that may not seem what like perfect joy when you talk about perfect joy for you. I suppose that's what makes joy so much different to happiness. You know, happiness is a state of a temporary state of being, where and often you don't realize you're happy until you look back on what's just gone past. You know, it can have an ecstatic sense to it. Joy runs deeper than that. I think joy is one of those is only understood and known when you realize how deeply, deeply loved you are. And perhaps that's the joy that we as Franciscans seek to give the world, is that by entering into the condition of other people and ourselves and fully embracing what comes our way, both good and bad, perhaps that's the joy, that's where the joy comes from. Because in doing so, by entering into the suffering, the difficulties, and being there for people in their toughest moments, and allowing people to be there for us in our toughest moments, we are really entering into what love really looks like. And we're reminding each other in those moments that they are completely and utterly loved beyond all measure, both by us, but more importantly by God the Father. And I think that's what the Franciscan, for me, that's what the Franciscan understanding of joy is all about. It's not about the situation, it's the way that we enter into every situation. You know, Francis was a joyful person from the beginning, even before his conversion. But after his conversion, he found joy in the most unusual places by our standards. He found joy in serving the lepers of his time, the poor, the desperately poor of his time, to fully entering into their condition to show that they are completely and utterly loved by God, because he was able to completely love them as well. And that's what I seek to do along this way. And others have done that for me. You know, the kindness and the generosity that I have experienced has been an expression of God's love towards me through the love of other people. You know, love is seeking the welfare and well-being, the thriving and flourishing of another person. And so many people along my way down here from Chepstow through to where I am now in Labuso have very much reached out in love towards me, offered me their homes, offered me their finances in order to sustain me, have reminded me that I am completely and utterly loved. And no matter what hardships I may face along the way, and they're not hardships in comparison to some others around this world, they truly are showing me that, I am utterly loved through their love for me, and I seek to do the same. And that's why I've partnered up with Amos Trust in order to show those in the world at the moment, who for me is the Palestinians, who are suffering the most horrendous circumstances, that they are still loved despite the fact that they may see that the world has rejected them even further. So I hope this has made sense. Feel free to comment. I will put a link to the full story in the so that you can read the full story of Francis's and Leo's conversation about perfect joy. It is a bit countercultural, but that's what I love about Francis. That's what so many people love about Francis, and it's what they loved about Jesus as well. So till next time. We're on to love next time. I promise it won't be so dark and on the suffering. Hang on, I can't promise that. Who am I to say? I will see you next time when we talk about love and how I've experienced that on this journey. Take care now. God bless.